surely he won't come to the temple. Surely he won't come to the festival. That's what the disciples said just 2 verses before this story today, because, as you know, the officials, by this late into John's gospel, are after Jesus. Coming into the city during the holy season of Passover would mean certain capture and arrest, and they can't believe he's making his way into town. But you and I know he's doing exactly that. This night he's going to spend in the home of his friends in Bethany. But chapter 12 starts a turn in John's gospel. He is on his way to Jerusalem, and everything starts to crackle and shift. Chapter 12 marks the end of Jesus' public ministry. The volume gets louder. Golgotha awaits. The place changes. That is, he is in Bethany now, the home of his friends, Mary, Martha, Lazarus. But more than a change of place, there is a change of time. That's what I want to talk about this morning. Last week we talked about the word life, and this week I want to talk about the word time, because both of these words require attention, because in both cases, the Greeks have 2 words where we only have 1. You remember last week when I preached on the rich young ruler, he was in search of eternal life. Zoe. The Greeks have 2 words, bios and zoe. Bios is exactly what it sounds like, biology. Pulse, respiration, the stuff that we take care of in the ER. Zoe, as we discussed last week, is life. Quality, abundance, delight, real living. And wouldn't it be helpful if we had 2 words? Wouldn't it be great if we could talk about life and life? Same thing about time. The Greeks had 2 words for time, chronos and kairos. They have a similar distinction. Chronos is what it sounds like, chronology. Timex and schedule and next week's calendar and how fast can he run the 40. That's chronos. But kairos has a quality, a density. It has meaning. I think it's time for us to get married. That's a different kind of time. Cooper came to trunk or treat last Wednesday, and he had the best time. Jesus said, the time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Do you see, that's a different kind of time than what time is the Falcons game this afternoon. There's time, and there's time. Maybe the best way of understanding kairos time would be to think of Thanksgiving. It's just a couple of weeks away. Thanksgiving all day is spent in kairos time. Nobody's looking at their watch. Lunch is served whenever it hits the table, not at a particular time. Families telling stories, they're picking on each other, they're being grateful, they're deepening relationship. And there becomes this thin membrane between this world and the next. It's a day of gratitude and relationship. It's not so much a day on the calendar as it is a day in our story. It's all about the time we're having has very little to do with time. Wouldn't it be helpful if we had 2 different words to talk about time? Our story today starts in chronos time. 6 days before Passover, Jesus came to Bethany. And that's about as chronos as it gets. You can get out your calendar, you can look up Passover, you can count back 6 days. But then in the story, the ordinary starts to transform, And all of a sudden, it's not about time at all. It starts ordinary enough. Martha is in the kitchen fixing dinner. You remember another story, don't you, about Martha in the kitchen fixing dinner. Mary is in the den at the feet of Jesus with the disciples listening to his story, and Martha gets fed up, and she comes out and fusses because her sister's not in the kitchen helping with her. And now we have another story. Martha's in the kitchen again. She's just served dinner to a big dinner party. It's her family, it's Jesus, it's the disciples. They're sitting after dinner, and that time right before the dessert is served. This is Kairos time. It's friendship and celebration, good food and good friends and retold stories. Mary and Martha certainly told the story again, that story that they celebrated the day when Jesus raised their brother Lazarus from the dead. They tell that story every time they get together. It's that kind of time. I have two sisters, so I know that they also probably picked on Lazarus, because that's what sisters do. They probably elbowed Jesus and said, there's some days we just wish you hadn't done it. He gets on our nerves. It's one of those evenings, we've all had them, the kind of evening you wish would never end. Story and laughter and fullness and kairos, and nobody's checking their watch. It's sacred and it's beautiful. And in the midst of this holy fullness, in the presence of the giver of life, Mary is just overcome. She goes into her room, she gets one of the costliest, most prized possessions that she has, a bottle of perfume, pure nard, worth 300 denarii. Since we know that a denarius was 1 day's pay for an agricultural worker, we can kind of do the math and put it into today's numbers. It would be about $23,000. She takes this outrageously expensive perfume, pours it on the feet of Jesus, and in this most intimate act, she rubs it into his feet with her hair. This abundance of Jesus' presence has generated an abundant response from Mary. Have you ever noticed that abundance just seems to happen everywhere Jesus goes? When Jesus is present, something starts kind of flowing over the edge. At a wedding in Cana of Galilee, there are 180 or so gallons of water, and Jesus turns it into 180 gallons of wine. Jesus is on a fishing boat, and 153 large fish just jump into the net. That's the kind of response Jesus creates. Jesus one day on the seashore, and a boy with his lunch pail and a loaf of bread and one fish, and all of a sudden in the hands of Jesus, there's abundance. 5,000 people are fed. There's something about being in the presence of Jesus that shifts things. People stop looking at their watches, and they let the abundance of a kairos moment fill up their lives. Last week, Robin Mathis gave the stewardship moment, told some of her and Chris's story. She declared, y'all might remember, she declared when it clicked for her that she was all in. And she called on us to respond to the abundance of this place, the abundance of the gospel, with our own response of abundance. Frustration, sure. She and all of us wish some things were different around here. We wish some things were moving faster. We wish some people acted less like themselves. But Robin declared that she was no longer measuring and weighing. She was in. The mission moves forward when people like Robin fully commit to the cause of Christ and declare, I am in, I am fully in. That's what Mary's act was all about. Sure, it was over the top. $23,000 worth of perfume, but she had to do something to say, I am all in, all to thee, my blessed Savior. I am all in. Did she know she was foretelling the passion? Who knows? When bodies are prepared for burial, they used perfume, probably not nard, probably nothing that expensive, but they would use perfume and start with the extremities, the hands, the feet, and work in. Whether she knew it or not, Jesus picks up on it. She might have kept this for the day of my burial, he says. But I don't know if she saw the symbolism or not. But you hear the shift in time in that language, don't you? The day of my burial is Kairos time. And in this act of devotion, something is shifting. The space between the everyday and the sacred is starting to break down. She was in the presence of the Holy One, the one who saved her brother. And her response, with that much fullness of gratitude, she had to do something to say, I'm all in. The Persian poet Rumi writes, gamble everything for love if you're a true human being. If not, leave this gathering. Half-heartedness doesn't reach into majesty. You set out to find God, but then you keep stopping for long periods at mean-spirited roadhouses. I think he wrote that in the 14th century. Maybe it hasn't changed. Mary has just rubbed her devotion in with her hair, and now the room feels awkward. Nobody's thinking about dessert right now. The smell of nard has just absolutely overwhelmed the room. Everybody in the room knows that he or she has just witnessed something that was beautiful and even holy. But then there is always one in the group. Isn't there always one in every group? Judas Iscariot says, 23 grand spilled on the floor. Why in the world did you not sell this perfume and give the money to the poor? But he didn't care much for the poor. He's just always counting money. He's always thinking about what could be done with money. He's the one looking at everybody else's spending habits and saying, I'll tell you what I would have done with that money. He's always counting. He's the guy who, when the check comes, he never wants to split it in half because he had the chicken and you had the steak and it was a little more on yours. Just counting. In the end, it got him, you know. You know that his sickness finally caused him to betray Jesus over 40 pieces of silver. Just think what I could do with 40 pieces of silver. But Jesus says, leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. It starts here. Care of the poor is vitally important. But the disciples knew that he was quoting from Deuteronomy. Since the poor will always be with you, I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and needy neighbor in your land. Nobody cares more for the poor than Jesus. But care for the poor starts with devotion to Christ. It starts by saying, I am all in. Generosity follows commitment to the Christ who saves. And Mary has offered this extravagant and intimate offering because some shift has happened. She is in the presence of the Christ. She is in the presence of the one who raised her brother up from the dead. She is sitting right in the fullness of Kairos time, and she has got to respond with generosity. She just has to. During the pastor search process, when I was a candidate to be your pastor, I had an interview one Sunday afternoon in what is now my office. And we started talking about what this level of devotion looks like, what it looks like for people to move into a deeper level of commitment. And in the midst of that, Melody Malike told the story about when that shift happened for her. It wasn't big, burning bush kind of story. It was this simple internal shift that happened, but she recognized it. She was sitting in worship and looked up and saw one of the lights out. And she said to herself, we've got a light out. I need to follow up on that tomorrow. And then she recognized the shift that had happened. She had said to herself, we have a light out, not they have a light out. And she realized it was hers to care for. This church was her place, her home, her stewardship, not somebody else's. That's a shift that says, I'm all in. Mary was so full of gratitude to the one who had saved her brother's life and who had given new life to her that she could only respond to that kind of abundance with generosity of her own. Today marks the end of our annual stewardship campaign, and yes, I want you to pledge, and yes, I want you to give. We're going to build next year's budget from this pledge. If you did not already, contact the office or put a pledge in the offering plate earlier in worship. I encourage you to mail it in this week, or you can pick up one of these before you go, fill it out, fold it in half, hand it to me, put it up here on the table. Don't let this opportunity move past. We need to know how much you intend to give so we can build a responsible budget. While I'm into my infomercial, let me just go ahead and say, I would encourage you to sign up for the automatic draft. I do the easy tithe through the website. It's great. It's also vacation proof. You're going to St. Simon's, it drafts. It works great. Everybody in the church office loves it. So today, set up your tithe, set up your pledge. But I want to tell you that that's not what I have been praying for this month. This is 4 weeks of stewardship emphasis that concludes today. But 4 weeks of emphasis is marked by Chronos time. And I have been praying for something different, a new experience of what God is doing, a new sense of everybody's ownership in what we're a part of. I've been praying for deeper relationships and more profound encounters with Christ and more experiences of the thin space between heaven and earth. I've been praying that more people will have the kairos moment that we've been talking about where they stop counting and just ask, how do I show my gratitude to the life-giving Christ? How do I declare to others in this church that I'm with them, I'm all in too? I'm praying that more people will notice the light out and claim it's their responsibility to get it taken care of. That people will look around the room and see a guest and declare that it is their stewardship to greet them and invite them to lunch. I'm praying that more of us make outrageous commitments to each other, to Christ's church, to spreading the good news of Christ's love to a hurting world. I'm praying that God will move among us and that we will open not just our checkbooks, but our calendars and our lives to be all in here. I'm praying that God's abundance will spark our generosity, and that God's abundance will be added to that, and our generosity will follow again. So I'm asking you to pray with me for those things, but also to consider how else you will show that you are all in too, that we are partners with each other in the great project of what Christ is trying to do in our world. Will you consider how you will respond as we stand and sing together?